What's up, cool people? I'm Matt Conroy. Welcome back to our Bible study. So, we are diving into Deuteronomy chapter 5 now, and we had, kind of a summary of events from Moses, as well as, then a general encouragement to follow God's instructions, and I guess his instructions that he's about to give them, which, at least if this is any indication, his instructions to them are pretty much just going to be, or mostly going to be him kind of repeating what God's instructions were before to the older generation. That, I guess it's not too surprising that he wants to make absolutely sure that the new generation of Israelites have heard those commandments that God gave the older generation before they go into the promised land. So, think that's about all the context that's needed for this. So, here we go. Deuteronomy, chapter 5. Moses called all the people of Israel together and said, "Listen carefully, Israel. Hear the decrees and regulations I am giving you today, so you may learn them and obey them. The Lord our God made a covenant with us at Mount Sinai. The Lord did not make this covenant with our ancestors, but with all of us who are alive today. At the mountain, the Lord spoke to you face to face from the heart of the fire. I stood as an intermediary between you and the Lord, for you were afraid of the fire and did not want to approach the mountain. He spoke to me, and I passed his words on to you. This is what he said." And we'll get to that in a second. So again, he uses the you, like a collective you, obviously, but like he's saying it as if, these things were said directly to these people, but it wasn't directly to these people. It was to the generation before them. So, I don't know. I guess just because of the use of that word in this context being a bit different than the typical context you would use that, I think he's, again, just using the word you in reference to the overall people group, as in the Israelites. Not saying, you exact living people who I am currently talking to now. Some of them might have heard this stuff. They just would have been really, really young then. But, yeah. Anyway. Had they all actually really heard this before and been able to understand it before, it doesn't make so much sense that he would be repeating this stuff now. That's why I feel like I should clarify. So, he's pretty much just going to be repeating what was said at Mount Sinai, at least in this bit that he's about to say. Also, Mount Sinai was also known as Mount Horeb. Just another name for it, I guess, from the original Hebrew. Probably because, again, their names for places were very literal, and so Horeb probably had a different meaning than Sinai, but both could have applied to the same place in this case. Okay, so now we're about to get into the words that Moses is passing on here. Starting with verse 6. This is now Moses saying the words that God said before. So, Moses is speaking, but quoting God here. So these are basically God's direct words. Anyway, verse 6. "I am the Lord your God, who rescued you from the land of Egypt, the place of your slavery. You must not have any other God but me. You must not make for yourself an idol of any kind, or an image of anything in the heavens, or on the earth, or in the sea. You must not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, who will not tolerate your affection for any other gods. I lay the sins of the parents upon their children. The entire family is affected, even children in the third and fourth generations of those who reject me. But I lavish unfailing love for 1,000 generations on those who love me and obey my commands." Okay, pausing there real quick. I know we talked about the whole idol thing just a chapter or two ago, but this is, I think, kind of more so like, not so much saying don't try and make any images of me, although like really we can't accurately represent God in an image anyway. But definitely don't make idols out of anything else, because everything else is either a false god, in their beliefs, or it's something I have made, which is obviously lesser than me. So worship the creator, not the creation, and don't worship any other deities out there that you might encounter in other, people groups or, places that you're maybe about to go into. And he basically says, if you don't follow me, or you even, it uses the word reject here. If you reject me, then not only are things not going to go well for you, but like this is a serious offense. So like it will have ripple effects multiple generations down the line. But if you show loyalty to me and obey my commands, then things will go well for you. I will have grace and love for thousands of generations. Many, many multiple. Which makes you wonder if we've even reached that many generations ahead. You kind of wouldn't think so. Footnote there just says, for thousands of those. Okay, so that might be a little bit different than 1,000 generations. 1,000 generations implies a whole lot longer time frame than just saying thousands, because that could just be thousands of people. There were already well over thousands of people just among the Israelites there. He just said that kids are blamed for the sins of their parents. What if the parents in next generation don't believe in God, but then the generation after that does? Okay, so first off, he says he lays the sins of the parents upon the children. By that, I think he means more so like the consequences of rejecting me and disobeying me are passed on multiple generations. It's not that God blames the younger generation for that sin, but the consequences of it have ripple effects for multiple generations. Just like okay, so as somewhat of an example that doesn't quite fit but is similar enough, like let's say there's a family where the father is an alcoholic. That obviously has a significant effect on the children in that family, because the family dynamic is completely altered due to the alcoholism of the father. And then, because his children have been affected in that way, their mentality and their approach to things are skewed by that and thus affect their children. And so, that's, I think, more so what's going on here. Not that God blames the future generations for their parents' sins, but that consequences can be felt multiple generations down the line. And it usually takes some time, usually takes a couple of generations to even really have a realistic chance at any kind of quote-unquote fixing the previous sin that was started, back with that original father who was an alcoholic. But in terms of the greater question, what if the parents in next generation don't believe in God, but then the generation after that does? Is that believer shunned by God for 2 generations of not believing? I would say no, because, there might be ripple effects or consequences, extra difficulties, for the child or for the generation who does believe, but because they believe, as it says in verse 10, God lavishes unfailing love on those who love me and obey my commands. Depending on the version you read it's either thousands of those or 1,000 generations. So either way, it's, God still shows compassion and love for those who believe, who obey, but there might still be some ripple effects from the prior generations and their disbelief. There might be, just kind of almost learned bad habits or ways of thinking that have been affected by the previous generations. I don't think this is meant to, like, when God says he lays sins of the parents on their children, even children in the third and fourth generations, like, I don't think that's supposed to be, oh yeah, this is guaranteed. Every single sinner, is cursing their descendants for 4 generations down the line, at minimum guaranteed. No, I don't think that's what he's saying here. I think it's more so just, again, sort of the consequences and the ripple effects of those sins. I should also say, I do not claim to be an expert on these things. However, like, the part of believing in God, I am confident in saying that trumps any, or overrules any, any inherited curse from prior generations or anything like that. Not that, the blessing of believing immediately removes or cancels out the curse from prior generations, but then you also have the blessing of God, hopeful, likely, I would say, community of believers who you can share your struggles with. You also have prayer that you can use to ask God for help with those issues that have been inherited, as well as the ones you create for yourself, because again, none of us are perfect. But anyway, okay. Lest I continue talking in circles, I think we've covered that point decently enough. So, then it is time to move on to verse 11. You must not misuse the name of the Lord your God. The Lord will not let you go unpunished if you misuse his name. I find it interesting how that just says to misuse his name, not specifically take his name in vain, as you may have heard from other translations, namely the King James Bible. Like, people almost assume taking God's name in vain is a particular kind of thing where you might say, like, oh my God, in relation to a certain event or whatever is going on. But I kind of like this translation better, where it says don't misuse the name of God, because there are other ways to misuse God's name that are honestly even more harmful than just, speaking it flippantly. Anyway, verse 12. Observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, as the Lord your God has commanded you. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. This includes you, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, your oxen and donkeys and other livestock, and any foreigners living among you. All your male and female servants must rest as you do. Remember that you were once slaves in Egypt, but the Lord your God brought you out with his strong hand and powerful arm. That is why the Lord your God has commanded you to rest on the Sabbath day. Yeah, so, also there are obvious benefits to, having at least a day each week to relax and take it easy. Because if you don't do that, that leads to a thing we call burnout. And possibly other actual, physically harmful effects. Like, if you don't stop working, your brain might be actually, affected negatively by the constant stress, for lack of a better word, that you're putting on yourself, working all the time. And I don't necessarily mean stress as in, I don't know what to do, or, worried kind of stress. That's not necessarily all that stress is. Stress is, in this context, just something that, is a pressing thing that you need to take care of, or even just something that calls you to any kind of action is a stressor. I don't know why I emphasize the O so much there, but it is something that adds stress to you because it is calling you to some sort of response or action. But occasionally taking a break, resting, not only does it give you that break and, alleviate some of those negative effects from constantly just working, but then it also gives you a chance to pause, reflect, hopefully, pray or read or seek God in some way. And I realize many people, myself included in a way, are not very good at following this. We tend to just keep doing things. We're kind of caught up in the hustle of making a living in this day and age, so it seems. Anyway. Okay. So, these are all, by the way, different commands from the Ten Commandments, like those ones that were written on the stone tablets and whatnot. First is not to have any other god. I guess second is don't make an idol. Third was don't misuse God's name. Fourth one is observe the Sabbath day. And then we continue on in verse 16. Honor your father and mother, as the Lord your God commanded you. Then you will live a long, full life in the land the Lord your God is giving you. You must not murder. You must not commit adultery. You must not steal. You must not testify falsely against your neighbor. You must not covet your neighbor's wife. You must not covet your neighbor's house or land, male or female servant, ox or donkey, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. Gonna pause there real quick. So, honoring father and mother, I guess, would be commandment 5. 6 is don't murder. 7, no adultery. 8, don't steal. 9, don't testify falsely. 10, don't covet. And covet, by the way, is more than just a simple, I kind of wish I had that, sure would be nice. No. Covet is, taking that, maybe not to the extreme, but to a significant extent where it's you're actually considering doing things you shouldn't to take possession of that which is not yours. At least that's my understanding of it anyway. The others are fairly obvious, so I don't think those require too much explanation. Honor your father and mother. So, honor doesn't necessarily mean, especially, if you're an adult, honor doesn't necessarily mean obey everything that they say. Just so we're clear. Honor, at least have some sort of respect for, your parents, even if your relationship is strained, even if they're not following God and you are, like, at least, treat them with a little extra humility, decency, and, yeah. That's what I take it to mean when it says honor your father and mother. Because I guess I think of it more like respect. You can respect someone without necessarily just like catering to their every whim, or, even just simply like obeying and following everything that they say or do. Yeah, again, like, I acknowledge and understand that there are some situations where, honor and respect is, like, A, not easy, and B, it might kind of look a little different. It might be more like, you want to respect them by leaving them alone, because if you're with them in the midst of the things that they're doing wrong, then, you're either going to do something bad yourself, or, like, you're going to get wrapped up in what they're doing that's bad, or you'll do something then to further strain the relationship, and that's not what God wants. I don't think that's really what much of anybody wants. So really, it's probably better keeping your distance, at least for the most part, in some situations. I get that. Okay. Moving on to verse 22. The Lord spoke these words to all of you assembled there at the foot of the mountain. He spoke with a loud voice from the heart of the fire, surrounded by clouds and deep darkness. This was all he said at that time, and he wrote his words on 2 stone tablets and gave them to me. But when you heard the voice from the heart of the darkness, while the mountain was blazing with fire, all your tribal leaders and elders came to me. They said, "Look, the Lord our God has shown us his glory and greatness, and we have heard his voice from the heart of the fire. Today we have seen that God can speak to us humans, and yet we live. But now, why should we risk death again? If the Lord our God speaks to us again, we will certainly die and be consumed by this awesome fire. Can any living thing hear the voice of the living God from the heart of the fire as we did and yet survive? Go yourself and listen to what the Lord our God says. Then come and tell us everything he tells you, and we will listen and obey." Yeah, that doesn't really... I feel like that didn't really work out as well as they hoped it would. I kind of get the sense that a lot of this, that the people were saying to Moses at Mount Sinai, of their concern that they wouldn't live if they heard God's voice again, like, God never really said to them that they would die from hearing his voice. That was something that they kind of projected onto God because they were scared of the just awesome, display that was shown, and probably to some effect the power of his voice, and the fact that it looked like a big storm kind of thing with fire in the midst of it. And so, yeah. It's understandable that they were afraid of God, but, like, I think they might have taken that fear a bit too far in, like, not wanting to directly hear God's voice again. Because now they've just kind of, triangulated the situation and made it more complex, with Moses being kind of almost forced to be the middleman. And then later on they go back on that and be like, well, doesn't God speak with us too? At least some of the other leaders say that. So, like, do you want to be directly hearing from God or not? Anyway, enough of a tangent on that whole thing. But yeah. Also, confirmation that, yes, these were the 10 Commandments written on the stone tablets earlier. So, yeah, anyway. I guess that's it for my thoughts on that section. A few more verses and we'll wrap up the chapter. Verse 28. The Lord heard the request you made to me, and he said, I have heard what the people said to you, and they are right. Oh, that they would always have hearts like this, that they might fear me and obey all my commands. If they did, they and their descendants would prosper forever. Go and tell them, return to your tents. But you stand here with me, so I can give you all my commands, decrees, and regulations. You must teach them to the people, so they can obey them in the land I am giving them as their possession. So Moses told the people, you must be careful to obey all the commands of the Lord your God, following his instructions in every detail. Stay on the path that the Lord your God has commanded you to follow. Then you will live long and prosperous lives in the land you are about to enter and occupy. So, now God's saying, though, that they're right. Just right to be fearful, or, that they might fear and obey all my commands. So, it's maybe implied that that's more so what God's saying they're right about. But I still kind of hesitate to say that he was, desiring then not to speak to them directly. Yes, the fear of God was a good response, especially given the display that they saw in front of them with all the fire and whatnot, and getting worried about being consumed by God's fire. But yeah, I don't know. That's one I'm not gonna claim to be totally sure on, because nowadays, especially as Christians, we try and hear from God directly, or at least as directly as we can, all the time. That's what we kind of hope for when, following God and wanting to discern his will for our lives. More specifically than just general commandments like these 10 commandments, or like, love the Lord your God, love your neighbor as yourself, those kinds of things. But yeah, now God did say that if anybody looked directly upon him, that they would die. That was definitely said. So in a way, it's even almost more generally speaking, perhaps related to hearing from God as well. You could maybe argue that hearing too much of, just the awesome, unfathomable nature of God directly might have also just, like, kind of in a way blown their minds and kind of somehow caused them to die in that way. I mean, I know it's possible to, like, get overwhelmed by certain things, which could cause things like, you know, heart attacks, fainting, all sorts of, you know, physical, medical complications like that. So I guess there could be some truth to that effect. But anyway, so long story short, from that point forward, though, God spoke to Moses, and Moses spoke to the people. People didn't hear directly from God. At least, you know, for a while. Anyway, and all of that was just to say, obey this stuff, and it'll help things go well for you in the land you're about to enter and occupy, the Promised Land. So anyway, I think that about wraps it up for Deuteronomy chapter 5. So, the short version is Moses is basically just telling the new generation of Israelites the Ten Commandments. And talking a little bit on top of that about how, like, after those were given to the old generation, it was kind of agreed that they would no longer hear directly from God, that Moses would be like an intermediary between God and the rest of the Israelites. Doesn't really explain what the situation was relative to that after Moses' death, but whatever. We haven't gotten there yet, so that might be answered later. But anyway, so, as always, like and share if you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel, click the bell to get updates when I post new videos, look down in the description to get info on other social media pages and all that good stuff, and leave comments down below there with any thoughts you have. So that's going to do it for now. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you for the next video. But until then, stay cool, people.